I'm recording this via Zoom, and this is the first of, I'm going to record a whole series about my manuscript, The Mound Builder. It's a mirror image. Huh. Okay. So this is a document, a collection of poems that I wrote in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I'm going to start with the first two poems. I'm just going to give a little brief explanation of how it came to be. I had intended to be a writer, among other things. I had a lot of different directions that I wanted to go in the arts, and they overlapped. I had a long history of, history of reading in history and trying to be aware of what's happened in the world in the past, even the far distant past. I have an interest in archaeology and interest in just not firsthand interest, like I didn't go digging, but I did when we were young. We used to get go look for arrowheads, and also went and found fossils at the Kalem mines in near Macon, Sandersville, and arrowheads. We would just stop at a field. My father would get out and we'd go look for arrowheads. It was just something he liked to do. And so that was as a kid. And so I had wondered about, the history of Native American cultures and across the Americas, and tried to educate myself and overcome stereotypical understanding of Native American culture in a lot of different ways, through both historical documents and famous books like Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, which I wept when I read, and kind of just having memories of that. And then, living in Georgia most of my life, in South Georgia and Southwest Georgia specifically, I was aware of the Kolomoki Mounds, and started investigating the mound culture, which actually was spread all over the eastern, east of the Mississippi, all over the United States, north and south. But specifically the Kolomoki cultures, and those that went south into Florida, did those mound cultures. And just like when you talk about the Aztecs and the Mayans, it's hard to overlook that they're human cultures, they're flawed cultures. They have some type of ascendancy towards a kind of divine aspiration, like Egyptian culture or other type of pyramidal cultures around the world. And yet there's periods in them where they must have become decadent at some point and participated in human sacrifice, things like that. But there's a holiness to some of the remnants of those cultures, and a holiness to some of the core ideas of those cultures, aside from human sacrifice, and a connection to the cosmos, to nature, to things that are sometimes lost in secular culture and contemporary spirituality, Christianity specifically. Any religion that becomes ingrained in dogma and loses its roots in real spiritual experience. And direct perceiving. So at this time, I was also heavily involved in investigating Rudolf Steiner's teachings, and I still am. But at that time, it was everything was new, everything, and I understood it less. I had more direct experiences. Now I just live in it. But then it was sort of like overwhelming. And so I investigated the Mound cultures, and then so eventually came to associate some of the remnants of the Mound culture with the Creek tribes in that area of Southwest Georgia where I lived, and the absence of actual Creek people. But I began to see it also in the Black people, because the history there is that they intermarried way back, and so you had, or they had associations. Freed Black slaves and runaway slaves began to enter into the tribal cultures of the Creek nations, and in similar tribes in that area. The Creek is a colonial misnomer. There were several different tribal groups that were centered around the creeks and rivers of the South. So specifically in the Georgia area, Alabama area, with the Chattahoochee and all the waterways in that area. I learned a lot. It's not a comprehensive understanding of these cultures, because you start getting into real difficulties, because they're not all one culture. Even the pyramidal cultures are different cultures. Just like in Central and South America, you have a diversity of cultures that, and a cosmopolitanism even, that allowed for trade and diversity of ideas and religions that influenced and also were in conflict with each other, just like any other culture. You see that in the Middle East, especially kind of cosmopolitan cities that were ruled by specific religious groups, but then also were accepting of others, and that's throughout the ages. But then on a personal level, I tried to integrate my own experiences in the South and Southwest with the absence of these cultures and the contrasting of my inner life and outer life and the experiences that I had investigating this. And I came across a lot of interesting books, like scientific writings from and also Native American writings, but scientific and also archaeological writings, but scientific archaeological writings from the late 19th century were much more poetic and much more like Darwin. It's easier to read than some of the kind of very specific types of analytical writings of contemporary science. So I was kind of drawn into the poetry of some of the books that I came across and I specifically one which I can't remember the name of, and had the chance to probably get that book, but lost it. And I don't even know the title anymore, but it was written in the late, there's a whole lot of things about that are theorizing. I was also involved tangentially with a group that was started by the founder of Westville, that dealt with pre-Columbian contact throughout the world to the Americas, and that was an interesting idea to me. And some of it's actually provable. There's a lot of theorizing, and it's not a way of dismissing Native American culture. It can be for some people to say that their spirituality came from other places, but just the fact that we don't know everything in history, we don't know what happened. The further you go back, actual literal events, it's harder to know. Spiritual seeing may lead you into an understanding of it, but without verification that's usually dismissed by scientists. Anyway, getting back to my point about my own experience. So I had this seminal experience. I had wanted to write for years, not necessarily about the Mound culture, but I was frustrated. I was a poet, and I wasn't frustrated as a poet, but in other ways, I wanted to write prose. I wanted to write novels and things like that, and I did some of that, but it was never published, never edited completely, things like that, short stories. But I had this great frustration because my life went in a direction towards visual art, because it was a lot, safer for me and easier for me to have a normal life of any kind, and also deal with the here and now, and not be so much in my head all the time, because I was dealing with physical matter and physical the materials of my art were visually and tactilely. I mean, my hands have calluses on them. You can see one of them right there, from actually doing the work and being grounded in the earth. And I also did gardening and things like that. So a lot of that comes into it. My experience with clay especially comes into a couple of the poems. But I was walking one day in this kind of state that I was in sometimes, of kind of melancholy that I've had throughout my life. Not hardcore depression, just this kind of sense of longing and melancholy, and steeped in the beauty of the world, and the kind of like the idea of being separated from nature. Not just the idea, but the feeling of being separated from nature at some level, because of a different type of consciousness that sort of draws us out of nature. And one of the things that we have to do in our time is to try and find a way back into nature and not lose the conscious ability to perceive at a higher level. So that's part of evolution. You have devolution as well, and you have this kind of falling away where we evolve to a certain extent. It becomes dangerous for us, and it destroys things like the earth now. And so in a way, this was also my ecological treatise at that time in the early 90s. My kind of passive way of being an ecologist. I'm not totally passive in my ecology, because I've been involved in other things ecologically. But and maybe you could say that poetry is not passive. In some ways, it takes a lot of effort to actually say something clearly, especially in poetry. But clarity for me is more than just clarity of mind. It's also clarity of heart, clarity of your inner feelings. And it takes a will to bring that to bear on reality. Anyway, so a lot of this is both joyous and also very painful. So the joy comes in the fact that it was a release for me, for this, to have the inspiration to write this, and a fact that I could accomplish this, and but it is steeped with that melancholy that was at this seminal part of it. So and the longing and the feeling of loss, something we've lost, maybe that we never had in Western culture, but it is something that we have lost in the sense of humanity. It's kind of like, it sort of goes back to the myths of Eden and the fall of man and things like that. But also the concept of the fortunate fall and the Faustian concept, taking Goethe as the starting point as opposed to Milton. It's not Milton, I'm sorry, not Milton. I'm going blank. Anyway, so the Faustian concept of redemption, where no matter how far we fall into matter, and our desire for knowledge, that there's the possibility of redemption from that fall. Anyway, so this is a list of the of the poems in it. And I'm going to start with the first two. I've already transcribed some others. I'm using this as a way to transcribe them, because Zoom will transcribe your work for you. So I'm going to start with the opening thoughts. And these opening thoughts are the seminal point at which I had this like inspiration, and everything flooded through from that point. I didn't always have poems come to me that quickly, but with that small kernel, I knew the whole thing would be written. I didn't know exactly what direction it would take me, because I was going to do investigation. I didn't want to just be writing randomly about a culture I didn't understand, because I knew that was not really right. So I wanted to somehow immerse myself in the culture. I've done these in a lot of different ways. I mean, I like sought for the plants and things like that they and become aware of the natural world and the way that they use the natural world and were related to the natural world, just by being in that landscape and finding the indigenous plants and how they were used and things like that. Like specifically the black drink, which I didn't really investigate that a lot, but I understood it's a kind of a holly that has a caffeine in it. The berries have caffeine in it. The leaves have caffeine in it. So it was actually at one time the University of Georgia was looking into ways to bring it into the commercial realm as an agricultural product. I don't know where that went or if it went anywhere, but it was used as an emetic, where it would they would use it to drink and then vomit before any type of decisions. So they would like purge themselves both physically and spiritually, so their minds were clear. Yeah, so it's a pretty strong drink if they were vomiting from it. And so I had this this first one was just like came into my mind. I didn't have anything to write it down, but I remembered it later. And then all the rest of the poems follow that, just pretty much one after the other. And then some of them after a lot of investigation and reading. Not as much reading as I wanted to do, but it wound up, that's the way my life is. I read and investigate, and at a certain point I'm overloaded and I have to stop and digest it. I'm not somebody that can read fast. I read relatively slow. So all these things are a part of that. And this is opening thoughts. Winter wind strikes the trees. Winter wind strikes the trees, carries the autumn burnt leaves to the ground, where they settle like migratory birds coming from far away. When will my heart rise up again to take hold of the things I love most, like a mother holds her children? So that's the first poem in the series. It's the shortest poem in the series as well. And some of them are very long for poetry, not novel length. The whole thing is under 100 pages with illustrations. So I have a series of illustrations. This is the first one. It's magnolia leaves, just kind of symbolic, kind of magnolia leaves. And then the second one is the Mound Builder's prologue. It's called Potential Ground. In the solid fort, a redemptive spring, I awoke early from furtive dreams, knowing what I would do. Now nearing autumn, lashed in this season from the coast by winds and rain, intermittently calm, in partial knowledge of world unrest, aware of what is left incomplete. I've come thus far declaring, not that intended for completion, but this well known, that left unfinished is part expression of what I sense and what is also held firmly within. In today's ensuing calm, I remember the leaf first blown, leaving in deathly disquietude, laying in deathly disquietude, remembering by proximity. I seek anew the ground of all potential. I use rhyme sometimes, I don't always use rhyme. And then the next one I will record, but at a later time, because I've already transcribed it and I just wanted to get started on this. Thank you.